The contract had broken 3 law firms and cost the Duke a minor fortune in consulting fees. So when the new maid picked it up from his desk, scanned it for exactly 2 minutes and 47 seconds, then quietly informed him that Clause 17 contradicted Clause 9 in a way that voided the entire agreement, his senior advisors didn't just go silent. They went pale. Because Alara Finch wasn't supposed to read legal documents. She was barely supposed to exist in their carefully ordered world. And yet she had just accomplished what 6 attorneys and 2 months of billable hours had failed to achieve. She had found the flaw that would save the Duke's entire shipping empire. The morning had begun like any other at Greystone Manor. Alara moved through the eastern wing with practiced invisibility, her steps soundless against marble floors that gleamed like dark water. She had been employed for 3 weeks, though employed was perhaps too generous a word. Inherited was more accurate. She had come with the property when Duke Corwin Ashford acquired the estate from a distant cousin, part of the fixtures no one had bothered to dismiss. The other servants spoke to her rarely. The housekeeper assigned her tasks without meeting her eyes. Even her quarters reflected her status. A narrow room in the oldest part of the manor, where winter wind found every crack in the stone. But Alara had learned long ago that invisibility had advantages. People spoke freely around servants they didn't truly see. They left important documents on desks, assuming illiteracy or indifference. They revealed themselves in 1,000 careless ways, never suspecting anyone was paying attention. And Alara paid attention to everything. She noticed, for instance, that the Duke hadn't slept properly in weeks. The coffee she brought each morning went cold while he stared at the same papers, his jaw tight, with barely contained frustration. She noticed the way his senior advisor, Lord Pemberton, spoke to him with the condescending patience reserved for children and fools. She noticed that the contract causing such consternation involved a shipping merger that would either secure the Duke's financial future or destroy it entirely. The other thing she noticed was that no one had actually read the contract properly. They had analyzed it, certainly, dissected individual clauses, debated interpretations, brought in specialists from London. But no one had simply sat down and read it, beginning to end, with the kind of attention a document that consequential deserved. That morning, she entered the Duke's study to find him standing at the window, shoulders rigid with tension. The contract lay abandoned on his desk, pages scattered in what looked like defeat. "Your Grace," she said quietly, setting down the morning tray. He didn't turn. Leave it. She should have obeyed immediately. Should have retreated into invisibility, as expected. Instead, she found herself looking at the contract, at the desperate disarray of papers that represented months of expensive failure. "Has anyone checked for internal contradictions?" The words left her mouth before wisdom could stop them. The Duke turned slowly. His eyes were gray as winter sky, and currently filled with exhausted irritation. "What did you say?" Every instinct screamed at her to apologize and flee. But something in his expression wasn't anger exactly. It was the look of a man drowning who had just heard a voice call from shore. "The contract, Your Grace. Sometimes complex documents contain clauses that contradict each other. It invalidates. I know what it invalidates." He crossed the room in 3 strides. "Who are you?" "Alara Finch, Your Grace. I work in." "I know where you work. How do you know about contract law?" The truth was complicated. The simple version she offered was not. "I read, Your Grace." His eyes narrowed, reassessing her entirely. Then he did something that shocked them both. He gathered the scattered pages, arranged them in order, and held them out to her. "Show me." Alara's hands trembled slightly as she took the contract. Behind the Duke, she could see the morning sun illuminating dust motes in the air, could hear distant sounds of the household awakening. Everything felt suddenly fragile, as though this moment existed in glass. She read quickly but carefully, her eyes moving through dense legal language with the fluency of long practice. The Duke watched her with an intensity that made concentration difficult, but she forced herself to focus. There. Clause 9 established that disputes would be resolved under maritime law. Clause 17 specified that all provisions fell under common commercial regulation. The two were mutually exclusive in cases involving international shipping. The entire contract was legally unenforceable. Clause 17 contradicts Clause 9, she said quietly. The jurisdiction conflict voids the agreement. Any court would reject it. The Duke stared at her, then at the contract, then back at her. How long have you worked here? 3 weeks, Your Grace. And before that, various households. She hesitated, then decided honesty was less dangerous than lies. I served as companion to Lady Margaret Thornfield before her death. She taught me to read legal documents. She said women should understand the contracts that govern their lives. Something shifted in the Duke's expression. Before he could respond, the study door opened without ceremony. Lord Pemberton entered, followed by 2 other advisors, all wearing expressions of practiced superiority. They stopped short when they saw Alara holding the contract. Your Grace, Pemberton said coldly. Is there some reason the maid is handling confidential documents? The Duke's voice, when he answered, carried an edge that made even Pemberton flinch. Yes, she just solved the problem you couldn't manage in 2 months. And I want to know how. Lord Pemberton's face went through several interesting colors before settling on an unhealthy crimson. The other 2 advisors, Sir Edmund Farley and Mr. Whitmore, the Duke's personal solicitor, looked between the Duke and Alara with expressions that suggested reality had become unpleasantly negotiable. Your Grace, Pemberton managed. Surely you cannot be serious. A maid, explain it to them. The Duke's command was directed at Alara, his gray eyes still fixed on her with that unsettling intensity. Show them what you found. Every woman in service knew the unspoken rules. Never draw attention. Never embarrass your betters. Never, under any circumstances, make powerful men look foolish in front of other powerful men. Alara was about to break all 3 simultaneously. She laid the contract on the desk and indicated the relevant sections with a steady finger, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Clause 9 establishes maritime jurisdiction for disputes. Clause 17 places the agreement under standard commercial law. In cases involving international shipping, these 2 frameworks are legally incompatible. The contract is unenforceable. The silence that followed had weight and texture. Whitmore reached for the document first, his solicitor's instincts overriding his shock. He read quickly, his expression shifting from skepticism to horror. Dear God, she's right. Impossible, Pemberton snapped. We had 3 firms review. She's right, Whitmore repeated, his voice hollow. The contradiction is explicit. Any competent judge would void this immediately. If we had signed this. He trailed off, the implications too dire to speak aloud. Sir Edmund had gone very quiet, which Alara recognized as more dangerous than bluster. How did 6 attorneys miss this? Because you gave them sections to analyze separately, Alara said before she could stop herself. No one read it straight through. The contradiction only appears if you hold both clauses in mind simultaneously. The Duke leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. 3 minutes. It took her 3 minutes. 2 minutes 47 seconds, Your Grace, Alara corrected quietly, then immediately regretted her precision. But the Duke's mouth curved slightly. My apologies for the inaccuracy. Pemberton looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find solid ground. The evidence was literally in his colleague's shaking hands. Finally, he turned to the Duke with barely controlled fury. Your Grace, regardless of this coincidence, it is highly irregular to involve servants in confidential business matters. The girl should be dismissed immediately for presumption. For saving me from financial ruin. The Duke's voice went dangerously soft. For overstepping her station in a manner that revealed your incompetence. The words cracked through the room like a whip. You brought me a poisoned contract, Pemberton. You assured me it was sound. You cost me 2 months and a fortune in fees while the merger deadline approached. And now you want me to punish the one person who actually solved the problem. Pemberton's jaw worked soundlessly. Sir Edmund interceded smoothly, playing peacemaker. Your Grace, Lord Pemberton's concern is for propriety. Surely you must see how irregular this situation appears. What I see, the Duke said, his eyes still on Alara, is that I've been paying experts who are outmatched by a woman who learned law from a deceased duchess. Which raises interesting questions about who I should actually be consulting. Alara felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. She had witnessed enough aristocratic politics to recognize the moment when a fight became permanent. Pemberton would never forgive this humiliation. These advisors would never forget her transgression. She should have felt afraid. Instead, she felt strangely calm as she met the Duke's gaze. Your Grace, if I may speak freely? One dark eyebrow rose. You haven't been so far. Despite everything, she nearly smiled. The contract can be renegotiated. Clause 17 can be amended to defer to maritime jurisdiction without changing the substance of the agreement. If you approach the other party now, before signing, you demonstrate superior legal diligence. They may actually respect you more. Whitmore was already nodding. She's read again. We could have this corrected within the week if we act immediately. Using whose draft language? Pemberton demanded acidly. The Duke's smile was blade thin. I imagine Miss Finch's thoughts on that as well. He wasn't wrong. Alara had already composed the necessary amendment in her head while explaining the problem. But actually voicing it would cross yet another invisible line, would transform this from fortunate accident into undeniable competence. She saw the choice clearly. Retreat now into safe invisibility, or step fully into the light that was already burning away her shadows. The language should mirror Clause 9's jurisdictional framework, she said quietly. Maritime law governs all disputes, with explicit reference to the International Maritime Convention of 1841. Clause 17 becomes subordinate, covering only non-disputed operational matters. 3 sentences. I can write them if you wish. The silence this time felt different. Pemberton looked apoplectic. Sir Edmund appeared calculating. Whitmore seemed caught between professional admiration and social horror. And the Duke was looking at her the way people looked at stars that suddenly appeared in familiar skies. Write them, he said. He offered her his own desk, his own pen, his own chair. Every advisor in the room watched with varying degrees of outrage as Alara sat in a seat no servant should occupy and drafted language that would save the Duke's shipping empire. Her handwriting was clear and precise. Lady Margaret had insisted on that. Sloppy writing suggests sloppy thinking, she used to say. When Alara finished, she stood immediately, yielding the chair back to its proper occupant. The Duke read her work once, quickly, then handed it to Whitmore. The solicitor reviewed it with the careful attention of a man whose professional pride had just been surgically removed. Finally, he set it down. It's perfect. Better than perfect. It closes loopholes I hadn't even noticed. Of course it does, the Duke murmured. He turned to his advisors. Gentlemen, I believe we have work to do. Whitmore, prepare a formal proposal using Miss Finch's language. Sir Edmund, draft the letter to our partners. We move today. It was dismissal, clear and final. Pemberton left without another word, his fury a wake of cold air. The others followed more slowly, Whitmore pausing to glance back at Alara with something that might have been respect. Then they were alone. The Duke remained silent for a long moment after the door closed, studying Alara with that penetrating gray gaze. She stood perfectly still, hands folded, waiting for whatever came next. Gratitude or dismissal. Possibly both. You knew this would cause problems for you, he said finally. Not a question. Yes, Your Grace. Yet you spoke anyway. The contract would have ruined you. The words came out simpler than she intended. More honest. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Why would that matter to a maid who's been here 3 weeks? Because she had watched him these past weeks, seen him work until exhaustion, noticed how he treated servants with distant courtesy rather than casual cruelty. Because Greystone Manor under his ownership felt safer than most places she'd worked. Because some part of her had decided, without consulting wisdom, that he was worth protecting. She couldn't say any of that. Lady Margaret taught me that competence unused is competence wasted, she said instead. She would have been disappointed if I'd stayed silent. Tell me about her. It wasn't a request. Alara found herself describing the brilliant, bitter woman who had hired a desperately poor girl as companion and then, almost accidentally, taught her everything. Languages, law, literature, philosophy. Lady Margaret had no children, no family who bothered visiting. Just a dying woman and a servant who listened. She left me her books, Alara finished quietly. The solicitors tried to contest it, said servants couldn't inherit. But she'd made the bequest ironclad. She was very good at contracts. I'm starting to understand why. The Duke moved to the window overlooking the East Gardens. You're educated far beyond your station. That makes you dangerous. You realize that? Yes, Your Grace. People like Pemberton will try to remove you now. They'll call you presumptuous, inappropriate. They'll make your life here difficult. I know. He turned to face her fully. Then why did you do it? The question was so direct it bypassed her usual defenses. She met his eyes and told the truth. Because I'm tired of being invisible. Because I watched you suffer over a problem I could solve. Because, she stopped to breathe. Because for once, I wanted to be more than what the world decided I should be. Something in his expression cracked open, just for a moment. Vulnerability, recognition. The look of someone who understood exactly what she meant. My father chose all my advisors, he said quietly. Pemberton was his closest friend. Sir Edmund served him for 30 years. I inherited them along with the title, and I've never quite. He paused. I've never felt like they worked for me. More like I'm being managed by them. And now you've undermined their authority, Alaris said, using me as the weapon. Is that what you think? He moved closer, his focus absolute. That I'm using you? Aren't you? I'm reconsidering everything. He gestured at the desk, the contract, the space she'd occupied. 6 attorneys. 2 months. A fortune in fees. And the answer was here all along. Invisible, because she wore the wrong clothes and served the wrong function. His jaw tightened. What else am I missing by refusing to look properly? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Alara knew she should lower her eyes, return to safe deference. Instead, she said, you need someone you trust reviewing all your contracts. Someone who reads for traps, not just terms. I need you to do that. Her breath caught. Your Grace. Not as a maid. He said it quickly, as if afraid she'd vanish. As, I don't know yet, an advisor, a consultant, something that lets you use your actual skills without pretending to dust furniture. That's impossible. Why? Because I say so. A flash of anger, not at her, at the world that made this conversation difficult. I'm a duke. I can employ whoever I want. Your advisors will resign. Good. They're clearly incompetent. Society will gossip. Society always gossips. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. In 3 minutes, you saved my entire future. That's worth far more than their approval. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Everything she'd learned about survival screamed warnings. This couldn't work. The gap between them was too vast. Pemberton and the others would destroy her the moment the Duke's attention wavered. But something else whispered beneath the fear. A possibility she'd never allowed herself to imagine. That competence might matter more than birth. That being seen might be worth the danger. I want 2 conditions, she heard herself say. His eyes widened slightly. Then he smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Name them. First, any position must be real. Not charity. I want actual work, actual responsibility. If I fail, dismiss me. But don't coddle me because you feel grateful. Agreed. Second, teach me what you know. Business, negotiation, the parts of your world Lady Margaret couldn't show me. Make me indispensable, not decorative. The smile widened. That might be the most ambitious demand anyone's ever made of me. Then you shouldn't have asked someone who solves impossible problems. He laughed, the sound surprised out of him. When he sobered, his expression held something new. Something that looked almost like hope. Tomorrow morning, we meet with the shipping partners. You'll attend as my personal consultant. Whitmore can handle the formal presentation, but you'll review everything first. After that, he paused. After that, we'll determine exactly what role suits you. Together, the others will fight this. Let them. His voice carried absolute certainty. You found the flaw they missed. You'll find others. By the time they realize what's happened, you'll be too valuable to remove. Alara should have argued further. Should have listed the 100 ways this could fail. Instead, she found herself nodding, accepting a future that seemed simultaneously impossible and inevitable. One more thing, the Duke added. What made you notice the contract at all? You could have simply served coffee and left. She considered lying, offering some logical explanation. But he'd asked for truth, and truth felt like the only solid ground available. Because you looked defeated, she said quietly. And I've spent my life watching powerful people. Most were defeat like anger or arrogance. You wore it like grief. It made you seem. She searched for the right word. Human. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then he extended his hand, an offer of partnership that violated every social boundary they both knew existed. Thank you, Miss Finch. For your honesty, your competence, and your terrible timing. She took his hand. His grip was warm and certain. You're welcome, Your Grace. For all 3. 6 months later, When Alara Finch appeared at the Duke's side during the most important business negotiation of the decade, society had exhausted its capacity for shock. By then, she'd reorganized his entire legal structure, identified 14 profitable investments his former advisors had overlooked, and earned a reputation that preceded her into every room. Pemberton had resigned within a month, his pride unable to survive working beneath someone he'd once wanted dismissed. Sir Edmund had adapted with calculating pragmatism. Whitmore had become her staunchest ally, grateful to work with someone who actually understood law rather than merely performing it. And the Duke of Greystone, Corwin, as he'd asked her to call him in private, had proven true to his word. He taught her business with the same intensity she brought to contracts. Their morning meetings became legendary among the staff, two minds working in perfect synchronization over coffee and complicated problems. People still whispered, of course, but whispers couldn't touch what they'd built, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine competence. The maid who'd read a contract in under 3 minutes had become the woman who saved an empire. She'd made herself indispensable, and in doing so, had finally become visible in all the ways that mattered.